been targeted in Israel and overseas, and it all leads back to Iran. It's as if Israel woke up one morning and said, we've got a great idea. Let's fly 2,000 kilometers and try to attack a country that has 95 million people, and we have 10 million people, that is 90 times bigger than Israel, put our soldiers at risk just out of the blue because Israel wants to take over the world. I mean, there's not a single shred of truth about this scenario. Let's wake up, everybody. At what point does a country have the right to defend its civilians against an enemy country that not only has said it wants to destroy you, but has launched 500 ballistic missiles in June, another series of ballistic missiles, including one that flew over my house and killed a worker in the middle of Tel Aviv today who will not go home to his family? At what point do we have the most basic right to defend our country? Should we just sit here and wait for them to keep firing and lay down and roll over? You know, there is such absolute hypocrisy. You know, I'm listening to Jeffrey Sachs, so Piers, you let him speak for half an hour, and it was, so emotional. Israel's committing suicide. Well, let me ask Jeffrey Sachs and you, how do you suppose that Israel should respond to the Iranian terror threats from 4 different countries that have been attacking Israel? Should we not fight back? Should we just lay down? Is that not suicide? At the end of the day, Piers,
thank you.
We are leading.
Thank you for proving my point. That's exactly what I said. This is Israel's problem, not America's.
As opposed
Israel's
to
not an ally of the United States.
Scott, just one second. At the end of the day, this will go down in history the exact opposite of what Jeffrey Sachs said. You have Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. Mark my words, they will go down in history like Churchill and Roosevelt, who were the first ones to confront the evil that spread throughout Germany and save the West. We are the very first ones, because there's an imminent threat against us, that are going to stop this threat before it hits American soil. It already hit Israeli soil. They will go down in history. And everybody else that decries this war will be a minor footnote of those who said we should give in to the regime. We can't defeat the regime. If this was 1945, they'd have just said, no, let's not finish off with Germany. Let's just let them reconstitute with Hitler's son, which is what Mujata is. He is Khomeini's son.
For heaven's sake.
Okay, right. Let me bring in.
Real quick.
Hang on.
Just give me 1 second.
Hang on, Scott.
Okay.
Well, very quickly, because Daniel's been waiting patiently.
Yeah.
Very quickly.
Just very quickly. I said, this has nothing to do with America. This is Israel's problem. And he said, this is Israel's problem for 5 minutes. Yeah, that's what I said. Israel's not a state in the Union. We have no treaty of alliance with Israel.
I'd like to respond. I think that the United States wants a secure Middle East. I don't think anybody wants a destabilized Middle East. When Israel, which is the United States' greatest ally, is under mortal threat, as we now see Saudi Arabia, Scott, who is the United States' supposed ally, is now also under threat. You've got the UAE, who is under threat. All of them are under threat by Iran.
Because you started a war.
The United States has the courage, and this president has the courage, Scott, beyond just protecting the U.S. troops, thousands of which have died over Iran over the last few decades, to say, you know what, I'm going to support the friends of the United States and to do the very simple act, which seems like none of you can accept, of defeating evil. Good standing up against evil. It can be defeated, and it must be defeated.
The point I would make to that, Doron, is that you're very optimistic that the regime is going to be defeated. And I think that the problem at the moment is there is no immediate sign of that happening. In fact, the opposite seems to be the case. Let me bring in Daniel
9 days. This is not a fairy tale.
Okay.
We actually have to fight to defeat the enemy.
Yeah, but we were told a year ago, actually not even a year ago, that the attack on the nuclear installations was incredibly successful and had neutralized the threat of Iran and its nuclear capability. And yet here we are, less than a year later, launching a massive war in Iran because apparently they were, imminently about to acquire the ability for a nuclear weapon. And those two positions seem to be completely incompatible. It's like either it was neutralized last June.
Shall I force my way in?
Well, okay,
or...
but it's stretching. It is stretching.
Shall I force my way in, or?
Yeah, Daniel. Let me bring in Daniel. Daniel, you've been very patient. Thank you. Over to you.
First, I'm struggling right now over this definition of evil. I saw a country lay waste to Gaza. I've seen a country that occupied Palestinians. October 7th was a crime. But what about the decades in which Palestinians lived under a brutal occupation, a regime of structural apartheid? And then I look at what was done subsequently, and I'm shaking, because when I hear these glib comparisons to the Holocaust and to the Nazi regime, I feel it's a form of cheapening, almost of Holocaust revisionism. You know, I'm quite confident that the Jewish population in Germany was not keeping the Germans under a brutal occupation for decades. What a horrible analogy to draw, to call this some kind of Holocaust. Now, first of all, if one's talking about evil, what we have witnessed in Gaza should be painful and shameful to anyone who has grown up in a tradition which respects and values Jewish life and which considers never again to not be a parochial call, but a universal global call. Now let's come on to the subject at hand, which is what is going on with Iran. Iran didn't attack Israel. Iran hasn't attacked Israel. I wish I could say that Israel hadn't attacked Iran, but as in your expressions of astonishment are wonderful, but they belie a revisionist view of history. The attack
near you, Daniel, in Tel Aviv.
The attack in June was initiated by Israel. The attack earlier this year, was initiated by Israel. And my question is twofold. First of all, is this extreme ambition, extremism, this maximalism, likely to play out well for Israel? And what do we think is going to happen as this plays out, as Mr. Horton just suggested, with the US? Because I would argue that you have an Iran that has a strategy, and you have an Israel that has a strategy. It seems very clear, very transparent, that the Israeli strategy is not some fairy tale of a happy new regime coming into place. It is precisely regime collapse, state implosion, dismantlement, and chaos. Why? Because Israel has been very clear that it has an agenda of regional domination here. Why does it need an agenda of regional domination? Because that's not about security. We can come back and talk about that. But that is central to the notion of a zero-sum endgame versus the Palestinians. I think the Iranians have come into this with strategic coherence. This time around, they've changed their national security posture and said, if this is going to be done against us, if this kind of a war is going to be launched against us, we will make it costly. We will establish a deterrence, and we will challenge the notion that America can stay cost-free in the West Asia region. The worry I have, amongst others, is that the party Israel is relying on, I don't think, has a strategy whatsoever. America used to go to wars that were often problematic for the world, for those who suffered, for America itself, with some degree of competence and coherence, some degree of a multi-layered interagency process. Today, I think you have rank incompetence and incoherence. And on any given day, the question is, what is this about? You can make a geopolitical case. You could say this is
Daniel, let me ask you this.
If I can finish just this one thought, Piers, I'd be appreciative.
Yeah.
You could say this is about a chokehold, like they see Greenland in geopolitical, geoeconomic terms, about oil. But you can also hear them talking about capitulation. You can hear them suggesting this could be a Venezuela 2.0. You can perhaps hear people saying...
Who's the they? I'm sorry, who's the they, Daniel?
The spokespeople of the administration that is carrying out
which administration?
War, Mr. Spielman. So I would suggest that this could end in a couple of days, or it could go on indefinitely. But what you have here is Iran has not tried to say we will escalate toe-to-toe with Israel and the US. They have said we will go vertical. We will expand the theater of war and make this a question not of military capacity, where the balance of power is clear, but of political endurance. And if you go into war, not like Afghanistan, if you're America, with 90% public support, not like Iraq, with 70% public support, but with barely 30% public support, bipartisan, criticism inside MAGA, your economy taking the stress, then the question of political endurance, which I think will decide this, I don't think looks good from an American and by extension, Israeli perspective.
Let me jump in. Okay, let me jump in. I mean, I would say the political stroke economic part of this cannot be understated because the economy is getting shredded globally. Oil and gas prices are absolutely rocketing. No one can get through the Strait of Hormuz pretty much without Iran say so. So this is a very perilous moment for the global economy, I would say, notwithstanding the military part of this, where the strategy of Iran has been just to scattergun attack its neighboring Gulf states because they know that by effectively doing that, and the way that they've been doing by targeting hotels and airports and so on, they are acting as a massive deterrent to people who are not naturally born in those states to want to go back to wherever they came from. You've seen lots of Brits go back to Britain, for example, because they suddenly think that this safe oasis is not as safe as they thought. But let me just ask you one question, Daniel, before I go to the others for their response to what you said. And it's this: when you said that Iran has not attacked Israel, and the two examples you cite were indeed retaliatory, but surely that ignores the reality, which is for decades the Iranian regime, which has publicly talked about being wedded to the annihilation of Israel, and here the chance of death to America at the same time, and has killed lots of Americans and Israelis. But the part you're missing, which I'm really curious about your response to, is that surely you would accept that by propping up and supporting with arms and lots of cash, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, they have been attacking Israel relentlessly for decades, but doing it through their proxies. And that is, to me, that is the same thing. Whether they're doing it directly or whether they're doing it through proxies, they have been attacking Israel. Now, you might have concerns about the way Israel has responded, and I would share many of those concerns. I've expressed them. But no one can persuade me that Israel isn't fundamentally justified in trying to defend itself from the tentacled attacks by the Iranian regime through its proxies for many, many years.
So I'm not going to carry the brief for the Iranian governing structure and what it has set out to do. What troubles me is...
What does that mean? I'm sorry.
Apply...
Daniel, what's your answer to Piers? What does that mean? Just answer the simple question. Do you consider the fact that Iran has funded and trained Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis to kill Israelis an offense?
So
are they actually attacking Israel, or are they
listen.
some parallel vertical regime? What's your answer?
Here's my response. I would consider it highly problematic if the response to Israel's genocide against the Palestinians, if the response to Israel being led by a war criminal with an international criminal court arrest warrant against his name, if the response to that would be an attempt to wipe the Israeli Jewish community off the map. Israel is a nuclear. Israel is a nuclear.
Daniel, you're sidestepping it. Daniel, is there any point at which you think Israel is justified in carrying out military intervention at all? Wait, give me one instance. Is there any moment? Is there anyone?
You see, when you can't, if you can't listen to a response to your argument,
Daniel,
are we just going to shout over each other?
No, I'm trying to ask you a real question because I don't understand your answer.
Can you shut up and I'll answer Piers' question?
Daniel, take it easy. Take it easy now. We don't have to get overly upset.
Well, I think this is...
Okay, Daniel, let Daniel answer the question. Let Daniel answer the question.
So I think the fact that Israel has maintained control of the sovereign skies of Lebanon, violated Lebanese sovereignty for decades, the fact that Israel has maintained a vicious, violent occupation against the Palestinians does not mean that the solution is a military solution. I think we should eschew and avoid war. And war in this instance was avoidable. Iran was manageable, not through kinetic military means. I don't think this is going to make the Jewish population of Israel or anywhere else even safer. I think quite the opposite. It will be more dangerous. Israel is going to have to step back from its illegal criminal activity. Iran should step back from its illegal criminal activity. And I would suggest that the way to do that is not by bombing schools, whether they're in Gaza, in Israel, or in Iran. I would suggest the way you do that is you pursue other options. And if anyone told me that Israel, as a nuclear power, which has attacked Iran, not been attacked by Iran, where Iran's so-called proxies were more of a deterrence than an offense, that Israel is more than capable of handling itself militarily, but apparently absolutely incapable of handling itself politically
Daniel,
and of
it sounds
having
like you're
a
defending
diplomatic
Iran.
game.
It sounds like you're defending Iran and persecuting Israel.
Sorry, I'm not defending
And
Iran, but it sounds a heck of a lot
Daniel,
like
is
you're
there a
defending
single
Israeli genocide.
moment in which I just
So
want to ask
my
you one
question to you, Mr.
Daniel, is there a
Spielman, is,
single
are you
moment,
ashamed and are you against the Israeli genocide
Daniel,
of the Palestinian
I'm trying to
people?
ask a question. Can I just ask one
Sorry,
question?
I didn't realize that was your job.
I
but
promise I'll
fine.
be quiet.
I didn't
Daniel, is there a
realize the gentleman on
single moment at which you think Israel is justified in carrying out military intervention against one of the enemies that are facing it, Hamas, Hezbollah, or Iran? Is there a single instance?
Yes, but I do not think
What
that
is it?
Israel is going to succeed militarily
But what is
if
it?
the premise of its position is we will continue to manage a permanent illegal occupation against the Palestinians. If you
I understand,
can't,
but we weren't
sorry,
occupying Gaza.
because you are therefore in a belligerent state in the region. Israel has bombed several countries in the
We were
region.
attacked
Israel
on October
hasn't
7th.
tried
You said it
the
was a
other
tragedy.
path.
What should we have
Sorry?
done after October
All right.
7th, Daniel?
Let me
When
bring
Hamas
in-
Should you
let
have
me
done
bring in-
before October 7th,
All right.
No, but what
Gentlemen,
after they
surely
attacked
that's
us,
the
Daniel,
question.
should we not
Gentlemen,
be
I'm just going to call a
history goes
timeout.
on October
Let me
7th?
call a timeout because Scott has been waiting very patiently. Scott, look, there are passionate arguments on all sides of this. Of course there are. Do you have any sympathy with Israel's look, there's a massive majority support for this in Israel, for what's happening in Iran, because the Israeli people have reached a general consensus that they believe Iran has been responsible for most of their problems in the last few decades, with these proxy terror groups just constantly trying to attack them. And that has caused this massive security crisis, as they see it, which has to be somehow brought to an end. Do you have any sympathy with the way the average Israeli feels about this and why they're supporting this?
Well, I understand it, just the same as if you swapped them out with any other nation in the world in the same position, if there was such a situation. It's fine, but it has nothing to do with the United States. And this goes back to a falsehood that Danny Danon said earlier in your show, where he was claiming that ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, Iran has been at war with Israel this way. But that's not true. Israel stayed friends with Iran all through the 1980s. As everyone knows, when Ronald Reagan switched sides in the Iran-Iraq war for a minute and sold weapons to the Ayatollah, he used the Israelis as the cutout because they had the ongoing operation. And I highly suggest everyone, especially you, Piers, read this fantastic book by Trita Parsi called Treacherous Alliance, about the real history of America, Israel, and Iran's relationship throughout that period. And where he shows that it was in 1993 when Yitzhak Rabin simply changed his strategy and Israel turned on Iran, and Iran started funding Hamas after that. And now, after Rabin was killed, the Likud basically took up the same policy of demonizing Iran, but instead of using it as an excuse for dealing with the Palestinians, they used it as an excuse to distract from the fact that they were going to never deal with the Palestinians in good faith. But it was the Israelis who turned on the Iranians first, and that wasn't until 1993. And Parsi even has Clinton administration officials laughing because the Israelis are demanding that America be hard on Iran, when 1 week ago they were taking Iran's side in the very same type arguments and all that. The book is called Treacherous Alliance. It's absolutely fantastic, and it shows all that. And then this is also, crucially, the basis for the argument in the clean break strategy by David Wormser and Richard Pearl in 1996, when Benjamin Netanyahu was first coming to office the first time. These are American neoconservatives who wrote this policy that says the clean break is with Oslo, said we're never going to deal with the Palestinians. We're going to take what they have. But in order to be able to get away with that, we need a whole new position of dominance in the region. And in order to do that, our first priority is we have to break the arch of power between Iran Syria and Hezbollah. And they said the way we want to do that is by getting rid of Saddam Hussein, which sounds insane, and it is. He was the Sunni roadblock in this Shiite arc of power here. But they thought that Turkey and Jordan would be dominant in the new Iraq, and then they would get the Iraqi Shiites to tell Hezbollah to stop being friends with Iran and start making nice with Israel. It's called the clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm.
Okay.
And the partner companion piece is called Coping with Crumbling States. And this is the naive pipe dream of the neoconservatives and the Likud. And this was the policy behind Iraq War II, which Netanyahu, of course, championed, and his neoconservative fifth column in America championed, and which backfired and only resulted in America fighting an 8-year war to install Iran's best friends from Dawa and the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in power there, and to build their militias into the Iraqi army. And as I said, Iraq War III against the Caliphate also was literally for Iran and their friends on the ground. When the Iranian Quds Force liberated Tikrit from ISIS, they had American airplanes flying overhead. And all this just goes to show to show the vast divergence of interests between Israel and the United States. And one more point here, and I'll be quiet and you guys can keep arguing for the rest of the show. But we already on the first day had a blowback terrorist attack from Israel's war in my hometown of Austin, Texas. And 3 innocent people were murdered by a Muslim immigrant who went down to the bar. Yeah, you wiped that smile off your face real quick there, Mr. Israeli spokesman. Murdered 3 of my hometown
I think it's horrible. Why would I smile when you got a Muslim that's killing a bunch of Americans?
Shut your damn mouth while I'm talking. And there was also an attempted bombing attack at the American embassy in Norway last night. And Americans are already dying and suffering blowback terrorism from another war on behalf of Israel. Just like Omar Mateen's slaughter in Orlando, just like San Bernardino,
Scott, I've got to jump in.
Blowback from Israel's foreign policy.
Okay. I just want to end very quickly with you, Doron, if I may. Looking at the prediction markets, poly market, they ask what price will crude oil hit by the end of March? A lot of money coming in here with options ranging from $40, so a lot less than it is now, to $200. I don't think it's too big a stretch to say that politically, I saw Netanyahu is calling for a potential election in Israel in the summer. Donald Trump is facing the midterms in America in November. Should oil reach $200 a barrel, then it is, I would argue, never mind militarily, never mind all the reasons you put forward for why this is a good idea, never mind anything else, that purely economically stroke politically, that one fact alone could bring down both the Netanyahu government and the Trump presidency in terms of its effectiveness to govern past the midterms. What would you say to that?
I'm glad you asked me, Piers. I think that it really lays bare the question, are we going to allow Iran to blackmail the entire world by saying, we are either going to close the Straits of Hormuz and drive up oil prices, or you're going to allow us, the Iranian regime, to survive, to create a nuclear program which they threaten out loud and say death to America and death to Israel. A ballistic missile program which will reach 8,000 ballistic missiles by 2027. Multiply 8,000 by the 10 people that died in Beit Shemesh. That's 80,000 Israelis alone. Are we going to allow the largest terror cancer in the world to survive because of oil prices? I think, Pierce, the answer is that we need to have steel nerves. I think that we have to not lose faith in the American people, the Israeli people, most of which understand, maybe not the 2 guests that I'm on the show with, that you have to have courage to defeat evil. If you think that we're going to leave the Iranian regime alone and it is just going to become a peaceful regime, that is a pipe dream. They are going to develop a nuclear weapon, and had we not struck them in June, the same ballistic missile that landed near Daniel today would have had a nuclear warhead on it. Every time we ask anyone on this panel, it is U.S. interests, it is Israel interests, and if we do not defeat Iran now and give those Iranian people, which is where this began a month and a half ago when Trump said help is on its way, 32,000 people were massacred in the streets. If we do not continue to deplete this regime and allow those people to bring in a leader, then we will be back in the same spot with a nuclear regime. And then I ask one question: what will be the price of oil when Iran has a nuclear regime and it strangles Hormuz and it says, you're going to give me whatever I want, otherwise I'm going to drop a nuclear bomb on you? That is not far away.
Piers,
guys, I'm sorry, we've run.
May I come in
way
with
over
one
time.
point, Piers?
If long as it's very, very brief.
It will be very brief, because I think what we've heard here, and this is important, is a very glib, unfact-based, fantastical position from an Israeli spokesperson of a nuclear power. And we've heard something from Mr. Horton, which I think should really have Israelis thinking long and hard. This is America. Israel is dependent on America. What are you doing to an Israeli image in America, which has already tanked during the relentless assault on Gaza? Americans are going to blame Israel for this, and they'll have a reason. This is seen as Israel first. And I think Israel is playing with fire in ways that could be spectacularly a blowback.
Well, I think
I
think my overview would be, I think it was Doron who said earlier that history will look back on this and judge accordingly. I completely concur. I just have no confidence that it will look back in quite the way you think it might. But it may be that the history will look back and say this was the moment when Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu conspired to destroy their legacies. Or it will end up being their legacy in the way they see it. But I do think the stakes are incredibly high. And I do think anyone who says with any confidence they know how this is going to play out is living in cloud cuckoo land. I've got to leave it there. Very interesting debate. Thank you all very much, because joining me now, live from Tehran, is Dr. Fouad Izzadi, professor at Tehran University. Dr. Izzadi, thank you for joining me on Uncensored. What is it like to be in Tehran at the moment?
We had a bombardment just a couple of hours ago. We have lost over 1,400 civilians, including 165 little girls. We are dealing with the Epstein class. They are bombing and killing little Iranian girls and raping little American girls.
The Americans and the Israelis believe that ultimately this is the beginning of the end of the